When the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011, Turkey suddenly found itself dealing with a massive influx of refugees. At first, like many countries, they were caught off guard. But over time, they developed an approach that, while far from perfect, managed to address many aspects of the crisis. The first thing Turkey did was to adopt an open-door policy. They didn't try to shut people out or build walls. Instead, they welcomed Syrian refugees, calling them guests, rather than foreigners or immigrants. This set the tone for how the country would approach the issue. But of course, good intentions aren't enough when you're dealing with millions of displaced people. Turkey had to get practical and fast. They set up camps near the border, providing shelter, food, and basic services. These camps weren't meant to be permanent solutions, but they helped manage the initial wave of arrivals. As time went on, Turkey realized that most refugees weren't going to return home anytime soon, so they shifted gears. Instead of just providing emergency aid, they focused on integration. They gave Syrians the right to work, access to healthcare, and perhaps most importantly, they opened up their education system to Syrian children. Now, I'm not saying this was all smooth sailing. There were definitely challenges. Some Turkish citizens weren't happy about the influx of refugees, worried about job competition and cultural changes. The government had to work hard to address these concerns while still supporting the refugees. One clever thing Turkey did was to spread refugees out across the country, rather than concentrating them all in border areas or big cities. This helped prevent the formation of isolated refugee communities and encouraged integration. They also got smart about leveraging international support. Turkey negotiated a deal with the EU, securing billions in aid to help manage the refugee situation. This money went towards things like education programs, healthcare facilities, and job training initiatives. But perhaps the most important aspect of Turkey's approach was its emphasis on self-reliance. Rather than keeping refugees dependent on aid, they encouraged them to find work, start businesses, and become part of the local economy. This not only helped the refugees, but also contributed to Turkey's economic growth. Now, I'm not saying Turkey's handling of the crisis was flawless. There were definitely bumps along the way, and some issues remain unresolved. But compared to many other countries, Turkey managed to turn a potential disaster into a somewhat manageable situation. The key takeaways? Be flexible, focus on integration rather than isolation, spread the impact across the country, leverage international support, and emphasize self-reliance. It's a complex issue, no doubt, but Turkey's experience shows that with the right approach, even a massive migration crisis can be handled in a way that benefits both the host country and the refugees themselves. One aspect we haven't touched on yet is the role of local governments in Turkey's approach. You see, while the national government set the overall policy, much of the day-to-day work of integrating refugees fell to municipalities, and many of them really stepped up to the plate. Take Istanbul, for example. The city set up community centers specifically for refugees, offering language classes, job training, and social services. They even created a smartphone app to help refugees navigate city services. It's this kind of grassroots community-level effort that really made a difference in helping Syrians adapt to life in Turkey. Now, let's talk about the cultural aspect. Turkey and Syria share some cultural and historical ties, which arguably made integration a bit easier than it might have been in, say, a northern European country. But Turkey still had to work hard to bridge the cultural gap. They launched public awareness campaigns to combat xenophobia and promote social cohesion. They organized cultural events celebrating both Turkish and Syrian traditions. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but these efforts went a long way in fostering mutual understanding. Another interesting point is how Turkey's approach evolved over time. In the early years of the crisis, the focus was mainly on providing immediate humanitarian aid. But as it became clear that many refugees would be staying long-term, the emphasis shifted to sustainable integration. This flexibility, this willingness to adapt policies as circumstances changed, was crucial to Turkey's success. We should also talk about the international dimension. Turkey's handling of the refugee crisis significantly impacted its relationships with other countries, particularly in Europe. The EU-Turkey deal I mentioned earlier is a prime example. By agreeing to help stem the flow of migrants to Europe, Turkey gained leverage in its dealings with the EU. It's a controversial agreement, no doubt, but it shows how Turkey managed to turn a crisis into a diplomatic opportunity. Now let's address some of the criticisms. Some argue that Turkey's policies have been too generous, straining the country's resources and potentially disadvantaging Turkish citizens. Others say Turkey hasn't done enough to fully integrate refugees into society, and there are concerns about the long-term status of Syrians in Turkey. Will they ever be granted citizenship, for instance? These are valid concerns, and they highlight the complexity of the issue. There's no perfect solution when you're dealing with a crisis of this magnitude. But I'd argue that Turkey's approach, for all its flaws, has been more successful than many alternatives we've seen around the world. Looking to the future, Turkey faces some big questions. How will they handle the long-term integration of Syrians? What happens if large numbers of refugees decide to return to Syria? How will Turkey's policies evolve as the situation in Syria changes? These aren't easy questions to answer, but based on what we've seen so far, I'm cautiously optimistic. Turkey has shown a remarkable ability to adapt and innovate in the face of this crisis. They've demonstrated that with the right policies and mindset, it's possible to turn a potential catastrophe into an opportunity for growth and development. In the end, Turkey's handling of the migration crisis isn't just about Turkey or Syria. It's a case study in how countries can respond to large-scale population movements in the 21st century. As climate change and political instability drive more and more people from their homes, the lessons from Turkey's experience could prove invaluable. It's a complex issue, full of nuances and challenges. But if there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that with creativity, flexibility, and a commitment to human dignity, even the most daunting crises can be managed. Turkey's story is far from over, but what they've achieved so far gives us reason for hope in an often troubled world. One aspect we haven't delved into yet is the role of civil society organizations in Turkey's response to the refugee crisis. These NGOs and grassroots groups played a crucial part in filling gaps where government services couldn't reach. They provided everything from legal aid to psychological support, often working in partnership with local authorities. For instance, several Turkish NGOs set up community kitchens in areas with high refugee populations, providing not just food, but also a space for social interaction and integration. Other organizations focused on women's empowerment, offering vocational training and support for Syrian women to start their own businesses. Now, let's talk about the economic impact in more detail. While the influx of refugees certainly put a strain on Turkey's resources initially, it also brought some unexpected benefits. Many Syrian entrepreneurs set up businesses in Turkey, bringing with them skills, connections, and new ideas. This led to an increase in trade between Turkey and other Middle Eastern countries, as Syrian business owners leveraged their networks. Moreover, the presence of a large refugee population actually stimulated certain sectors of the economy. Construction boomed as new housing and infrastructure were needed. The textile industry saw growth as many Syrians brought expertise in this area. It's a reminder that migration, while challenging, can also be a driver of economic dynamism. Another interesting aspect is how Turkey's approach influenced its soft power in the region. By taking in so many refugees and treating them relatively well, Turkey enhanced its reputation in the Arab world. This had implications for Turkey's foreign policy and its ambitions as a regional leader. We should also discuss the impact on Turkey's demographic makeup. With millions of Syrians, many of them young, Turkey's population got a significant boost. In a country facing an aging population, like many developed nations, this influx of younger people could have long-term economic benefits if properly integrated. Now, let's address some of the ongoing challenges. Language remains a significant barrier for many Syrians in Turkey. While efforts have been made to provide Turkish language education, it's an area that still needs work. There's also the issue of brain waste. Many highly educated Syrians struggle to find jobs matching their qualifications due to licensing issues or lack of recognition of their degrees. Another challenge is the rise of politicization around the refugee issue. As the crisis has dragged on, some political parties have started using anti-refugee rhetoric to gain support. This has led to increased tensions in some areas and poses a risk to the integration efforts made so far. Looking ahead, one of the big questions is, what will happen if and when the situation in Syria stabilizes enough for large-scale return migration? Turkey will need to carefully manage this process to avoid disrupting the lives of those who have built new lives in Turkey, while also facilitating the return of those who wish to go back. There's also the question of how Turkey's experience might be applied elsewhere. While every country's situation is unique, there are certainly lessons that could be valuable for other nations dealing with large-scale migration. The emphasis on urban integration, the use of technology and service delivery, the focus on self-reliance. These are all strategies that could potentially be adapted to other contexts. In conclusion, Turkey's handling of the Syrian refugee crisis is a complex story of challenges, innovations, and ongoing struggles. It's not a perfect solution, no response to a crisis of this scale could be, but it offers valuable insights into how countries can approach large-scale migration in a way that balances humanitarian concerns with practical realities. As we face a future where climate change and political instability are likely to drive more mass migrations, the lessons from Turkey's experience could prove invaluable. It's a reminder that with creativity, flexibility, and a commitment to human dignity, even the most daunting crises can be turned into opportunities for growth and development. Thanks for tuning into this deep dive on how Turkey tackled the migration crisis. It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but I hope this video has given you some food for thought on how countries can approach large-scale migration challenges. If you found this analysis interesting, there's plenty more where that came from. I regularly cover global issues, policy innovations, and geopolitical trends on this channel. So, if you want to stay informed about how countries are dealing with major challenges like migration, climate change, and economic shifts, hit that subscribe button right now. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. Your support helps me continue bringing you in-depth content on crucial global topics. Got any thoughts on Turkey's approach to the refugee crisis? Or maybe you have ideas for future video topics? Drop them in the comments below. I always love hearing from you guys. Until next time, keep thinking critically about world events. See you in the next video!